I was under the impression early on when we saw Dick Durbin come out and call for a ceasefire and sort of like sort of shuffle back a little bit. But I think it was Murphy that came out with not quite ceasefire language, but this was like, 2 weeks into, maybe even less, into Israel's bombing of Gaza. I had interpreted that, and I was completely wrong, that this was trying to give Biden space, some oxygen, some political room to start to sort of publicly call for a ceasefire. That was not the case whatsoever. In fact, Durbin seemed like he was just hung out to dry there and sort of shuffled off. Is there, do you have a sense? Because it really does feel like this is this is like, I don't know, Joe Biden to trains in terms of like his deep commitment to whatever Israel does, because we are so far beyond what is in the U.S. national security interest at this point. I just think that it's inarguable that this is something that is like he has some deep emotional resonance with for whatever reason. Do you have a sense from anybody you've talked with within the administration, around the administration, that there is a red line for him? It clearly is not in terms of a humanitarian line regarding the Palestinians, but from a national security line. Like, because there are two things that occur to me in this regard. One, the U.S. is sending some top intelligence leader to go out with no evidence, saying that despite what the Washington Post report was, that the Al-Shifa hospital was in fact a command center. My next question is, how do we have that intelligence if the Israelis couldn't even present it? That opens up to, but putting that aside, regardless of whether I believe that or not, one of the mystifying things about Biden in his foreign policy was his failure to re-up the nuclear deal with Iran. I think we've spoken about this in the past, that it was almost mystifying. And what was then appears to me as a sort of bumbling failure or now looks like there may have been more intent associated with not signing that. Like that there were, the roadblocks came more from Biden himself than anything else. I wonder just if you could respond to that and get a sense of like, just how far is Biden willing to risk U.S. national security at this point in this, what seems to me like even beyond ideological compulsion to support whatever Israel does?
I think this is the most important question. You're asking what is the red line? And I think the terrifying answer is there may not be a red line. The red lines that exist are the red lines in which Biden would escalate further and actually drag the U.S. into the war, in the sense of there's attack against U.S. troops, etc., instead of thinking of whether those troops should be there in the first place, or is it wise for us to put American soldiers in the lines of fire when we actually don't have an interest and a stake. I think one of the mistakes a lot of people, myself included, committed early on was believing that Biden wanted a ceasefire, but either wasn't really willing to pay the political cost for it, or was looking for additional leverage before he pushed for it, or that he was waiting to give the Israelis a couple of weeks before he pushed for it. I think at this point it's clear that was not the issue. Biden signed on to Israel's maximalist military objectives of eliminating Hamas from Gaza. He wanted to see Israel do to Hamas what the United States could not do to the Taliban. And as a result, I think that is a key reason as to why he has been so adamantly opposed to a ceasefire, because he is in agreement with the Israeli objective. An objective, incidentally, that many, and I would perhaps say most analysts believe is not achievable, including, incidentally, the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who said this very clearly in the very first sentence of his op-ed in the Haaretz about a week or so ago, that there is a nil chance of achieving this narrative. So we have that situation in which he's just bought into this plan, and as a result,
can I add, along with it, forgive me interrupting, but it's not just Olmert, but I think Secretary of Defense Austin said the same thing a month ago, that it's arguable as to whether you can actually materially achieve this just in terms of just sheer numbers, but that it's quite clear you will lose the war even if you win the battle against Hamas. I mean,
we had experienced this. We won militarily wars and lost the peace and lost everything else, including standing and credibility. We've done that for more than 20 years in the Middle East right now. So we, more than anyone else, should be able to tell the Israelis that this is not a path that is likely to lead to success. In fact, it's almost certain to lead to some form of a failure. But you also asked another question there, Sam, that I think is very important, which is, what is he risking here? Not only war. I would go further. I mean, obviously, it's tremendously concerning that he is, in my view, very nonchalant about the escalation risk. And is not stopping this in the manner that he could by going for a ceasefire. But according to the Biden administration and the Democratic Party themselves, they say that the elections next year, or this year now, is about the survival of American democracy. Because a return of Trump, in their assessment, could very well spell the death of American democracy. Well, taking a look at the polls and seeing how Biden is destroying his winning coalition from 2020 through this war. And it's not just Arab Americans, it's Gen Z, it's Latinos, it's African Americans. Then he's not just risking war. He's not just risking the elections. According to his own statements, he's risking American democracy. And the question is, for what? What is the American interest in continued warfare in Gaza that is so valuable that we're willing to risk all of these things?
Where does Saudi Arabia stand in this, given, the fact that the reports that you mentioned earlier about the Iran-backed Houthis, sending over rockets and, that kind of proxy battle being a little bit in the background between Saudi Arabia and Iran? I mean, it seems domestically like Saudi Arabia would have a very difficult time selling this to the public, but they are run by a king. So
certainly, I think the Saudis are keeping a very low profile on this. I think MBS would probably very much like to go back to normalization, potentially blaming Hamas for all of this and saying that Hamas's actions have led to a scenario in which the Saudis no longer have a choice but to give up on the Palestinian cause. I don't think, however, that is feasible. The latest polls that were done, incidentally published by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, showed a tremendous increase in support for Hamas, a tremendous opposition, not just to Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel, but also other Arab countries normalizing relations with Israel. So I think it's somewhat delusional, frankly, to hear the administration still talking about normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel as if it is something that is realistic at this moment, given everything that is going on and given the fact that it appears that this conflict is going to continue for quite some time, because, again, the one entity that really could put an end to it, the United States, is unwilling to do so. And just on that point, I think it's quite fascinating to see how Israelis openly talk about how they could not continue this war had it not been for the very generous support that Biden has given Israel in terms of military material. More than 10,000 tons of military equipment, weapons, and artillery has been sent to Israel since October 7th. And according to a former Israeli major general, it is impossible for Israel to continue this war if these shipments were discontinued. So the United States has tremendous amount of leverage. But again, Biden doesn't want to use it because I think he is bought into and aligned with the objective that Netanyahu has put forward.
Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to what you've been tweeting and what you've been writing as of late at majority.fm and our podcast and YouTube descriptions. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hopefully we can do this again soon, and we can talk about this in retrospect, but I'm afraid it may not be the case for quite some time.
Let's hope so.
Yep. All right. Thanks so much, Trita.
Thank you.